So just a recap about Django and the request response cycle of how we're going to be building out our applications within our Django project. We're going to start with the urls.py file first in the URLs or the Django project URLs. Then we're going to point to the Django app urls.py file, which we're going to have to create that file from scratch. And then the urls.py file points at what view method to execute. And then we're going to do any logic. We can pretty much do whatever we want in here. This is where we're going to be talking to our database with our models. So if we need to grab a user or grab any data, persistent data in the database, we'll grab it in that respective view method. We're going to grab that data, and then we're going to render an HTML template that exists in our templates directory. And then we're going to display that stuff back to the client. Any questions about this? All right, so what we're going to do, we're just going to keep on creating Django projects, creating Django apps, building out our routes, views, and templates. So that we're just going to keep on repeating that entire process to the point where it's just going to become second nature and everything. So today we're going to actually build out a CRUD app. Does anybody know what a CRUD app is?
Create, read, update, delete.
Yep. So an application that creates records, updates records, reads records, and delete records. Pretty much everything on the web is a CRUD app in some capacity, such as Facebook, Twitter, Reddit, that budgeting app, Mint, or you need a budget. Those are all CRUD apps as well. You're creating records, you're saving data. Now they might not all have all aspects of the CRUD, but they will have some aspect of it. All right. So what we're going to do, I'm going to go through the tutorial. All this stuff is in today's lecture. So don't follow along right now because we're going to have you do this afterwards. But just know that this is also in the lecture material. So the first thing I need to do before I create a Django project is what?
Virtual environment.
Yep. So I'm in this directory called Intro to Django. I'm going to create my Django project in here, but this is also where I'm going to create my virtual environment. So I'm going to do Python make venv venv. All right. I created my virtual environment. Now what do I need to do? Activate it. So source venv bin activate. Like so. If I wanted to deactivate it, what's the command to get out of my virtual environment?
Deactivate.
Deactivate. There you go. So just go back into it. All right. So for this Django project, I'm going to be using a Postgres database. So what are the packages that I'm going to need to install?
PG.
So pip install psychub g2. What else do I need to install?
Django.
Django. Right now, I'm not going to install anything else, but we might install some stuff later. All right. Let's install. It might take a little while to install. All right, successfully installed that. The Django getting okay, there we go. So I can always check if everything is installed or check what is installed. So I've got Django, psychub g2, great. All right, so I'm going to create a like a blog. So, or no, what am I gonna check? Never mind. That's gonna be tomorrow. So I'm going to create a Django project called My Site, and this application is going to essentially take polls as far as like it's going to have a question, it's going to have some answers to select from. I'm going to be able to vote on that poll for that question. such as like, what is your favorite movie? There's going to be a list of like 5 movies, and you can vote which one is your favorite or the funniest or whatever. So I'm going to create a new Django project running the command Django-admin start project. I'm going to call it my site. And I don't want to create a subdirectory for my Django project. I just want the root directory to be on the same level as my venv. So this is where I want the manage.py file to exist. So I'm going to do my site space period. And there we go. We've got my manage.py file right there and my Django project called my site. And here we've got our settings.py file as well. So this is where we have that Django project URLs, the settings.py file. This is where all the Django project's configuration is at and all that. All right. So the next thing I'm going to do is create a Django app called polls, because this is going to take polls and it's going to display the poll information. So what's the command to create a new Django app?
Python manage.py start app polls.
Start app polls. Okay, Python manage.py file is the command that you run pretty much to do anything within Django. So Python manage.py and then execute some command, because it all goes through that manage.py file. So start app polls. There we go. All right. So I've got my polls app. Next, what am I going to do? So I created my polls Django app. What's a good habit to get into right after you create your Django app?
Editing settings.
Yep. Add your app to settings. There we go. Where to go? So settings, installed apps, polls, like so. All right. So the next thing I'm going to do is create my database on my local machine called like polls -db or _db. So I'm going to create db polls _db. I can PSQL polls db like so. So I've got my database. What is it? That doesn't have anything in there yet. All right. So I created my database. Now I want to link my database, my Postgres database, to my Django app, or I'm sorry, my Django project in the settings.py file. If I scroll all the way down, I can see databases. I've got this default database. It's using SQLite. I don't want to use SQLite. I want to use PostgreSQL. And then I need to name that, what database that I want to attach that to. So name polls DB. There we go. All right. So now let's actually just, let's go back here and look. So let's just get our first route working, just to have it to display something on the screen. So when I first launched my Django project or start the server, it's going to come and look into my Django project urls.py file. So I'm going to open up my site, my Django projects URLs file. I'm going to delete all this text initially. Now I'm going to include as well, because I need to include the URLs to my Django app now. So I'm going to create a new path to /polls/ so I'm just going to call this the same as my app. You can call this whatever you want. I'm just going to call it to /polls right now. And I'm going to include the polls.urls file. So when I visit /polls, it's going to go and look at the other routes that come after polls inside of the polls.urls file. So I'm in my Django app now called polls. I don't have a urls.py file, so I'm going to go ahead and create that. Whoop. So urls.py. I'm going to split the screen like so. And I'm going to, from Django.urls, import path. And I'm going to say URL patterns. I could also just copy this stuff over if I wanted to. So it's also going to look in here. So the path, I'm just going to go to, once it goes to polls/nothing. So when I visit polls/ that gets over here, I want to look in the views.index method, which I haven't created yet. And I'm also going to name that route index. So I'm going to have to do from the current working directory, import the views. So again, I'm here. I'm in my Django project URLs. I'm pointing my Django app URLs. Now I'm going to be pointing to my views.method. So, all right, now I need to open up my views. All right. So what I'm going to do is create a method, def index. Each method will take in at least the request, the HTTP request. And it's going to return an HTTP response. And we'll mess with this later. And this response is just going to be an H1 that says, this is my polls app. So I'm going to have to import my HTTP response. So from Django HTTP, import HTTP response. So I just want to get this up and running like so. So I haven't created a template yet because this HTTP response is just going to render this HTML, but we will create templates later. So next, I'm going to actually run the server. So I'm going to do Python manage.py, and to run the server, I just write run server. And that port is going to be 8,000. So localhost 8,000. So there's nothing found, but it says, hey, these are the URL patterns that are in your Django project. So admin and polls. So I'll just go to /polls. And there we go. Got this is my polls app. So just a quick refresher. I created my Django project, my site. I created my Django app called polls. I added my polls app to my settings.py file under installed apps. I created a created a Postgres database called polls_db. And I changed this databases from a SQLite 3 to a Postgres database, and I added my polls_db name right here. Then in my Django project URLs, I imported the include. I added a new route called polls. So when I visit /polls, I'm essentially telling it to look now in the polls, my Django app polls.urls file. So it came over here. It's going to look for a URL pattern that comes after polls that matches this URL pattern. Here's the only one that I have created. It's going to go into look in the views file, look for an index method, a method called index. I come under the views. Here's that index method that accepts the request and returns this HTTP response that renders this H1 tag that says this is my polls app. And there we go. questions? What questions do you have about that process?
On line 5 in polls urls.py. Is there a time when that empty string is not an empty string?
Yes. And we'll yes. So if you want to add other routes to it, such as this is going to represent our like almost like our home page. But if you want to like visit a very specific poll or question, we might want to add like an ID here or some other URL pattern. So we'll create those routes. And those routes will point to a different view method other than index, which we'll have to create. Yeah, good question. Any other questions? All right. So with that, we created our index in our views. But if we look here, we also want to create some data into our Postgres database. So where do I create the tables, the database tables format? All right.
Models.
So here we go. We've got models. So in here, we're going to create some models, and we're going to create two models. A question model that takes in some question text question text, as well as like when that question was created. So like a date of when that record was created. And we're going to also create a choice table that is associated with that question. So that choice belongs to that question. So like, what's your favorite movie, or what are funny movies? And it's gonna, each choice is gonna represent a movie, and that movie is gonna be associated with that question. So I'm gonna create a question class that inherits from the model class. And it's gonna have question text that equals models, and this is going to be a char field that has a max length of, I'll say 255. And it's also going to have a publish date. That's going to be a models.date time field. And it's going to say date published. All right.
A quick question on that date time field.
Yep.
I was reading through the docs today, trying to find out where you have date published in there, and I never found any reference to that. Where is that going to show up? There are multiple parameters you can put in there, but I never saw one just like a text field or something.
I could be mistaken, but I think it depends on let's see, what are some options? I don't know if you need to have that. That's a good question.
I just thought maybe when you query it from the database, that will be a field like that precedes the actual date or time or something. But that wasn't.
I thought it had something to do with when it was in with the way it might be displayed instead of an object. When it gets to the like HTML template, I think it just, I could be wrong. I think it has something the way it's displayed. That field is displayed, instead of it saying like pub date, it'll actually say published or date published.
Okay.
But I could be wrong. But we don't have to have that here. All right. So we have the question. Now we have to create a choice that belongs to that question. So choice inherits from the model class. Whoop. And the question that this belongs to. So one question can have many choices. So how do I associate this question to belong to a,
Key.
so is it foreign key? And the foreign key, it's the question. That's what model. Oh my gosh, my dog's barking. I'm gonna say on delete. Those models cascade. And I'm gonna add another argument, which is the related name. And this is going to take a string. And essentially the related name is typically the name of the class, this table, but plural, so choices. And did you all go over what related name is at all?
Yeah, I
Yeah,
believe.
we
touched
covered it
on it.
pretty well.
All right, cool. All right, so I'm gonna say choice text equals models char field max length. I'll say this is 200, and each choice will take in a vote, which is models integer field, and it's gonna have a default value of 0 initially. All right, any questions on this, on these models? No? Can y'all hear my
We have
dog
one-
barking in the backyard or in the background?
Just barely.
Okay.
It's not that loud.
All
A
right,
quick
cool.
question about the related name.
Yep.
So the way we use that, right, when we start, like if we do a query, we would do like question dot choices dot all, and it would pull up all the choices that are associated with that question, right? Is that-
Correct. Yep. So if you didn't have related name, like so, if you wanted to go from question to choices, there is a way to do it, but you'd have to you almost have to memorize what that's called. There's a name. But this will actually define, hey, what keyword will you use to get all the question or all the choices for that question? But yeah. All right. Cool. All right. So next thing I need to do, I'm going to kill the server. There we go. I'm going to make migrations. So I'm going to actually apply these question choice table. So Python manage.py, make migration. So make migrations polls. And there we go. We created a model question, model choice. And you can see in here, that's that initial .py file. So I can also apply or migrate these changes or these tables to the actual database. So I can actually execute that script by running Python manage.py, migrate polls. There it applied all the migrations to that database. And you can check that by doing polls db/d. There you go. You can see all the polls choice and the polls question. We can also apply all the changes or all the internal migrations scripts. So if we look at the site settings, so we can apply all the migration scripts that are associated with the admin, auth, and content type sessions and messages as well. If we just do Python manage.py migrate, that will apply all this migration scripts that exist in the Django project. So if I do that, it will apply all the remaining built-in migration scripts that Django comes with. Now, I didn't need to do that, but you'll be probably using these at some point. All right. What questions do you have about that? Nothing. All right. So with that, let's go ahead and create some values or some records in our database. So I'm going to use extensions. So there is a library or a package called Django extensions that extends a bunch of functionality to Django. It has a bunch of built-in methods and all of that that we can leverage to make our life a little easier when interacting with Django. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to install Django extensions as a package, and I'm going to add it to my installed apps. You don't have to do this every time, but it's just going to make my life a little bit easier. Is it Django dash extensions? Yep. So, all right. So Django extensions were installed. Now I'm going to add that to my settings.py file, Django _extensions. And one of the things it does for us is it provides us with a Python shell called shell plus that automatically imports everything in the shell that we need. So I'm going to actually create a Python shell. So Python manage.py shell _plus, and see, like, already imports all this stuff for Django. Now in here, I can create Django questions and stuff. What in the hell is that? So if I wanted to insert a question into the Django database, I can do so here. But I'm going to first do from Django.utils import time zone, because I'll need to create a time for this date time field. So I'm going to import there, and I'm going to actually create a new question. So question dash text equals what's the funniest movie? And then the publish date equals, I can do time zone dash now. And there we go. So I created a new question object right here with the question. But notice how, so we've got this question object, but right here it says none. That means it hasn't been saved to the actual database yet. So what I'm going to do, I'm going to create that question again, but I'm going to assign it to a variable called question. Or I guess I'll just call it like Q1, because I might create a couple more. Q1. Now, if I type Q1, you can see it's a question object, but it hasn't been saved to the database yet. So I can do Q1/save. There we go. And now I can do Q1 again. And now it's been saved to the database because it has an ID of 1 now. And you can see Q1-ID is 1, Q1.question text. What's the funniest movie? Question text, or Q1/pub date. And there we have a date time field. All right. Any questions on creating all of that? All right, let's actually create some choices for this. So how do I create choices? So there's a couple ways I can do it. I can like create a choice 1 equals choice, and I can add like that question equals like Q1. So that question Q1, because that's a question object and it needs to be a question object. I can say choice text. What's a funny movie that somebody wants to put on this poll?
Monty Python and the Holy Grail.
Oh gee, Monty Python and how do you spell Grail? Is it just like that? Or is it
Yep.
with an- okay. All right. And I think that's all I need to do. I'll just do like votes equals 0, even though I don't technically need to do that. Let's see if that works. Uh-oh. Oh, is it vote? There we go. So if I do C1 dot question. So is that question one object? So I'm going to do C1 dot save. There we go. So there's also an easier way I can do that, which is through this related name. So if I wanted to grab the question one from the database, I can do, oh yeah, go ahead.
I see just a few lines above you assigned C1, that choice object. And then it says, it shows none for not being saved to the database. And then you did C1.question, and it appears to have saved to the database by just that.
So this is the choice hasn't been saved to the database, but the question was already saved to the database.
Oh, okay.
So C1 dot question is a question object.
Gotcha.
So I can also grab a question by like I don't know, Q, I'll just say a question equals question dot objects dot all. So if I do question, I get a query set, so which is a list of questions in the database, but I don't want that. I just want that individual question dot objects. How do I grab the very first question in the database? Is it
Get
first?
ID equals 1.
So yeah, I could do get ID equals 1. I can do that.
Sure, yeah,
So that works. What's another way I can do it?
first.
Is it just first? And I can do question there. Cool. So if I wanted to create a couple more choices, I can do question. Well, before I do that, how do I grab all the choices associated with this question? Question dot. I'm doing question dot choices dot all. And there we go. We have the choices query set. So we have a list of choices. Right now, we only have one choice. But I can create more choices by just that are automatically associated with this question. So I don't actually have to attach a question object like I did up here by just doing question dot choices dot create. So create will create the object and automatically save it. So I'm going to do question text, not question text, choice text. Any other funny movies that someone wants to put on that list?
Spaceballs.
Space balls. So create that. So there, see now notice how it automatically saved that choice by doing 2. Like here, it wasn't saved yet. All right, so I'm gonna press up again to create another one associated with that question. What are any other ones? Come on.
Dodgeball.
Dodgeball. All right, we got 3 question choices. Let's add one more. Another comedy.
Big Daddy.
What is it? Big Daddy?
Yeah, Ben Stiller.
Yeah. All right, Big Daddy. All right, so we've got 4 choices for that. So if I wanted to see those choices, I can do question dot choices dot all. And there we go. We've got the 3 choices or the 4 choices associated with that question. All right, and vice versa. I can also just like grab that choice 1. That choice 1 comes from this variable all the way up here, and I can do choice 1 dot question, and that will grab the question associated with that choice as well. So you can go from choice to question and question the choice. All right. Cool. So I've got some stuff in my database. Great. So let's go ahead and create these. Let's actually create like a CRUD app that actually lists all these choices out and everything. All right. So in our index.py file, or not in our file, index.py file. So we have our views. I'm going to split the screen here. All right. So in our in our index method that goes to /polls, I wanted to list out all the questions to, I guess I should probably create more questions, but we don't need to do that right now. We can do that later. So if I wanted to create something that grabs a question or all the questions in the database, how do I go about doing that? So when I visit, it's actually manage.py, run server. So when I visit polls, instead of it saying this is my polls app, I want it to list all the questions.
Oh, they want to make a template?
Yep. Before I do that, I'm going to go ahead and follow this. So inside of here, I'm going to grab all the questions from the database, and then I'm going to go ahead and create my template. So inside of index, I'm going to say all questions equals question.objects.all. All right, so I'm getting an error there. So it doesn't look like I'm importing. So I'm going to say from my models, import the question model. I might as well just go ahead and import the choice as well, even though I might not need to do that, but I'm just going to do it right now. So I've got all my questions. And now I'm going to respond, not with this HTTP response. I'm going to return and render the request, the location of where my template's going to be, which I haven't created yet, but I'm going to create a polls directory and an index.html. Yeah, that's what I want. Index.html. And then I'm going to pass in an object that represents all the questions. So I can do all questions, colon, all questions. So I've got an object that has all the questions. So now if I visit here, I'm probably going to get an error. So template does not exist. So I haven't, I'm looking for this template in polls index.html, which doesn't exist yet. So inside my polls, I'm going to create a templates directory. And inside my templates, I'm going to create another directory called polls, which is also the name of my Django app. And then in here, I'm going to create an index.html. And in here, I can just make sure that this is work, all polls. And now I can refresh that. Still doesn't work. Why not? Let's see. Polls. So it says template does not exist at the polls. Request all question. So I'm getting an error. Why is that error happening? Okay. I just didn't reload it or didn't restart the server. So there we go. So now inside my index, I can use Jinja to go ahead and actually create this. So first, I'm just going to go ahead and see if all polls are actually being, or all questions are going to be here. So I'm printing all questions, which should be a query set, a list of questions. So if I look down here, so it's a query set with a list of question objects. Right now, there's only one. What questions do you have about what just happened or what I just did?
So we have the, in the render statement there, you have the object at the end.
Yep.
And you have all questions, colon, all questions. Is that basically just destructuring the object that you get back? Is that what that's called?
No. So this part,
Yeah. I
no.
understand
So
what it's doing. I'm just trying to.
so this is, I'm literally just creating an object. It's not destructuring. I'm literally just passing in a Python object or a Python dictionary in this slot. So I can call this key whatever I want, but I'm calling it questions or all questions, and I'm setting the value to this query set.
Okay, so the all questions is actually going to be a list. It's
Yes.
not going to be a one-for-one thing. Okay,
Correct.
I got
Yep.
you now.
A good question. All right. What other questions do you have?
So does render require you to pass in an object as the third parameter?
Yep. So you can't pass in an array or anything like that. It must be an object. It could be an empty object, but it needs to be an object. So if I deleted that and put like an array, it says context must be a dict rather than a list. So this needs to be a dictionary.
Okay.
Yep. All right. So in here, I'm going to use Jinja to loop through the questions and display each question. So I can say like, oh, not that. In my template, I'm going to do any logic, any statements need to go in between curly brace followed by a % sign. So I'm going to say like for question in questions, and then I need to end for like so. And I'm highly confident there needs to be a space in between each. So you can't do like for like this without a space or else it'll break. So I'm going to actually make this a list. It's going to display a list. Why did it do that again? There we go. And then anything I actually want to display from the question, I'm going to say question text. So if I come over here and refresh this, there we go. We've got what's the funniest movie. So this is looping through. So for each question in the questions list, which comes from this key on the dictionary that I'm passing in. Questions on that. Right. So what I'm going to want to do is make this a link. And when I click on this link, I want it to go to the individual question that also lists out the choices for corresponding to that question. But before I do that, let's go ahead and. All right, so we finished, or we almost finished our index, which will display I just locked myself out. That will display a list of all the questions. So what I want to do is make this a link. And when I click on this link, I want it to go to the individual question as well as the corresponding choices for that question. So I want to actually make this question text a link. How do I go about making it a link? Does anyone remember the tag to make a link?
Anchor.
An anchor tag. So I can say I'll just do that right now. I'm going to move that question text in there. And the A tag has an href that I'll use to go to a specific ID. So I want to actually link to /polls. Whoop. And then question.id.
I have a quick question.
Yep.
This is kind of answered by basically what you're doing, but just so I have a better understanding, when you're using that hyperlink reference, it's relative to still the project destination, right? It's not relative to the page. Is that going to be consistent throughout?
So are you talking about this part?
Yeah, like if that is the polls URL, you wouldn't be able to just put /ID. You need to put polls
Right.
ID.
Yeah.
So it's the URL going back through the main URLs.
Correct.
Okay.
Yep. All right. So, and let's go ahead and refresh that. So there, that's a link. And when I click there, oh, it looks like it does go to / oh, do I need to do that? Let's see, let's go back, refresh. There we go. Yep. So when I click this link in the URL up here, I click there, it goes to polls /1, but it says page not found because we don't have a URL to go to /1. So again, let's go back here. We brought out built out the URLs, created a view, created the template associated with that view method. Now let's go back to the URLs and build out a URL associated with this poll /1. All right. So in the URLs, instead of going to /polls /nothing, I actually want to go to polls / which is an integer, if I remember correctly off the top of my head. Where'd it go? Yeah, polls, which is going to be represents an integer, because this is going to be a dynamic route. It's going to change. It could be 1, 12, 150. So what I'm going to do, this is going to be an integer, and it represents the question ID for that. And instead of views index, I'm going to call it detail, because it's going to be the detail of that question. Questions about this route. So this represents, meaning after that /, it's going to be a dynamic value. And we're going to say, hey, it's an integer, and it's going to represent, we're going to call that, and it's going to represent the question ID. And we can call this question _ID whatever we want, but we want to kind of call it like a variable name. Well, I'll kind of show you why that is. So this question ID, we'll talk about it, is essentially going to be passed into this detail view method. And we're going to be able to grab this question ID, this value in the URL, and find that question by its ID. So created that URL, and I'm going to the view. So I'm going to create a method called detail, which takes in the request. It also takes in the question ID from that URL. So it's going to take in that question ID like so. Any questions on that so far?
That line 6 in the urls.py, is that HTML or Jinja that's rendering out the integer?
This part,
Yeah.
like when you say, is it Jinja that's rendering this right here?
Yeah. So like what language, I guess, for lack of a better question, but like that int colon syntax, like, is that Python that's able to pass that into that path?
That's a good question. I don't know. I think that is the way the path, something to do with the path method, how it parses through whatever's passed in here.
Okay, so maybe Django specific.
Yeah. So I'm just going to say return right here. So if I wanted to print the question ID that's being passed in here, if I come over here, I'm going to refresh this value error. But if you look down here, I've got 1 right there. If I pass in this big number right there, click enter, I get that big number here. So that's what that question ID is. So now that ID is associated with a question ID. So what we can do is say question equals question.objects.get, or ID equals question ID. I see I spelled question wrong. And I can print that question like so. Now, if I come over here and just go to polls and click what's the funniest movie, I get that error, which is okay. But you can see I've got that question object right there. And I actually don't like the way this is printed out. So what I'm going to actually do is inside of my models, does anyone remember from OOP what method prints our objects pretty?
String.
Yep. So I can do def under string, takes in self, and I can just return an f string. And I'm going to say like question ID. I'm just going to say self.id. Text, question text, and I'll say like pub date. Pub date. And I shouldn't have to restart the server or anything, but let's see. So if I refresh that, you can see now that question is printed out a little bit nicer. All right, when I print it out. So inside of this detail, so I've got that question. Now I just want to return, render the request, not requestion. I'm going to create a poll/detail.html template. So I'm going to create another template, and I'm going to pass in the question as a dictionary question. Like so. So now, what can I do? So inside of my index, or inside of my templates, at the same level as my index, I can create a detail.html. And I'm going to create an H1 detail details about question. I'm going to say question.id. And I'm going to have an H2 tag or H2. And that's going to just say the question dot question text. Now I want to list out all the choices associated with that question. So how do I go about grabbing all the choices associated with that question? There's a couple of ways I could do it. So I have the question in here. How would I grab all the choices associated with that question? Anybody?
Well, the way you've
Question.
started it, it looks like you can store those choices as a separate query, as a list, and pass it in the dictionary as a separate value, and then loop that list.
Yep. So I can do this. So question dot choices dot all she'll grab all the choices associated with that question. And since this is, I don't want to pass that, I'm passing that dictionary directly in there. I'm going to export that, not export it, but like move it to a data variable. So I'm going to say choices, choices. And then instead of rendering this, I'm going to render just the data object. So now I have two keys. I've got the question key and I've got the choices. So in here, I can do for choice and choices. I can say N4. I'm just going to make a div and say like choice dot choice text. I'm just going to do that initially just to see if I can do that. So if I come over here and refresh it, there we go. So I've got Big Daddy, Dodgeball, Spaceballs, Monty Python, and the Holy Grail. Questions about how you can grabbing about the detail page at all? You can also, if you didn't want to do this part in the so if I didn't say I didn't grab all the choices inside my view, I'm just going to comment that out. I can also do that query directly in my detail page. So I've got the question. Now I can actually do that query question.choices.all, but now I don't have to invoke it like that. I can just do .all and it'll also grab all the choices associated with that question. So if I refresh that, it should still work. Questions about that. But I don't know specifically from like a performance standpoint, doing the choice like two multiple queries in here and versus a query in my detail page. I'm not quite sure, but no, you can do either or. I'm just gonna do like so. All right. Any questions so far? So once we have the detail page, maybe I also want once I get to this, I'm gonna grab also the results of each question. So if I go to results, I want to see the who voted, not who voted for what, but how many votes each choice got. So coming back here, I created that template for the detail. Now I'm going to go back to the router and create a route for results. So when I go to question ID / results, I'm going to create a results method. And so inside of my views, let's see. What do I want to do? Yep. So I'm going to see def results. That takes in that request. It also takes in that question ID again from that URL. I'm going to move the views over here. So I'm able to grab it, the question ID again. And I'm going to do the same thing that I did up here. I'm going to grab the question like so. But so right here, I'm doing the same query 2 times in this one and this one. I'm going to create a helper method. So like helper query that says .get question that takes in a question ID, and it literally just will return a question .objects .get ID equals question ID. So instead of doing this multiple times, I can just run that get question helper method that will grab that question. And then I'm going to return render the request. I'm going to do polls. I'm going to create a results HTML template. And I'm going to pass in that question again.
You've got a typo on those assignments.
Where am I at?
Like line 21, you have question ID and then in parentheses question ID.
Oh, you are correct. Get question. Thank you. All right. So I'm at the results, grab that question, and I'm going to render that question inside the results. So inside of here, the detail on the same level as the index and detail HTML, I'm going to create results.html. And in the results, I'm going to say H1 details about same thing, question and question.id. I'm going to do something very similar in here. Instead of listing just the choice text, I'm also going to list out the choice vote. So how many votes? Actually, let's change that up. Choice text. Choice dot vote. Yeah, there we go. So if I come over here, refresh, But now if I go to /results, you can see how many votes these got. But let's go ahead and actually make to be able to actually vote for each choice. So what we're going to want to do, this part is kind of difficult. In here, so we're going to loop through each choice, but we're going to create a form for the choices. We're going to have like an input. So I'm going to create a form. Like so. And the type of action we're creating, we're going to say, like, where do we want this route to go? So, yeah. So typically when we do an action, we'll pass in a route here. But I don't want to just do a like /polls. Well, maybe I will right now. Question.id, but I want to go to a specific route that will vote on this. So I'm going to go to vote. So they're going to, when I click on each, so when I'm in, I'm going to get an error. Yeah. Well, when I end up clicking on each choice, it's going to make a post request to this URL. And it's going to be, I'm going to be able to extract the choice from that. So in this form, I'm going to also specify the method I'm going to be generating. I'm going to be generating a post request because I'm going to be creating, I'm going to be adding something to the database. So for choice in choices.all, I'm just going to copy some code over here. Just so let's just look here. So I'm creating an input. It's a type there. It's a radial button. The name is choice. So this is a for loop counter. This is built into Django. It's essentially choice 1, choice 2, choice 3. So that's the ID. And the value is also the ID of that choice for each choice. And say same thing, it's the label. This label is for this specific choice. So let's just see what that looks like. See if it even works. What does it say? Choice 1. All right, so this is what that looks like. So when I click on that, and then I'm going to have a submit button down here. Input, it could be just a button. It's going to be a type equals submit. So that since that types input form is a type submit and it's inside of this form, this button is it's going to be a button that's associated with that form. So when I click on this and click vote, watch where it goes to. It's going to go to vote. And it's the request.method is a post request. What questions do you have?
Why was it important to have this go to a separate URI when my thought process was making it a post request is different enough, you could handle it differently?
So that's just a decision we made. In the future, you're going to see, we're going to make a post request to the same URL. So if we made a in the detail page here, we're just doing get requests. Because when we visit that detail page, this is just a get request. Oh, why does it keep doing that? Oh, I'm gonna add that there. So this is a get request when I visit that page. So when I refresh that, get request, if I click vote, I can also make a post request to this part. But I can just based off of whether it's a get or post request, I can handle all that logic here. So I could have done that. This is just a choice I'm doing, that you could make post requests to different routes if you want to. So that's all.
Okay.
But so notice, well, I guess I'll get this working first. So inside that URL results, so I'm going to polls/question ID/vote, but I don't have a route, a URL for that yet. So let's go ahead and create one. So instead of results, I'm going to go to vote, and I'm going to create a method called vote. Vote like so. So I'm going to bring, so now I'm over here. Def vote, and it takes in the request, the question ID, and it grabs that question from the database. So get question, I'm using that helper method. And then I'm going to do a try except. So I need to extract, let's actually, I'm just going to return this initially, and I'm going to print the request. Let's just initially do the request. And see if we can somehow figure out which one we're voting on. So if I click Big Daddy and click vote, it goes to vote. Uh-oh, I get a CSRF verification failed, request aborted. So inside of my detail page, inside of this form, in Django requires a CSRF token to be attached to every single form inside of, I can't remember. Does anyone know what CSRF stands for? I can't remember. But essentially, anytime I post something in a form or type input into a form, Django is looking for almost like a security token that's attached to that form to make sure that form, whatever data is coming from that form, is safe. So like people can't hack it and override that form. So Django is actually actively looking for a token. So inside of each form, at the very top, I need to add a CSRF token to the form. And this is just for security reasons in Django. So it's essentially saying, hey, this form is actually coming from that URL. See, it says CSRF token missing. And so in each form you create in Django, you need to have this CSRF token here. So if I what is this? I can't remember off the top of my head.
Cross-site request forgery.
Yeah. Thank you. Cross-site request forgery token. So yeah, it prevents people from sending data from a form to that URL, this vote URL from another location, essentially. So if I refresh this and I click Big Daddy and click vote, Okay, did not return an HTTP response object. That's great. That we're not doing that yet, but we're looking at that post. So right, that's what we're printing out right here. So let's actually do post. Let's just keep looking to see if we can somehow extract each choice of who we're voting for from that request. So I'm going to do Big Daddy vote. So now you can see here, we've got that. This is from the form. It's this query dict. And notice here, we've got this CSRF middleware token. And we've got this array of bunch of alphanumeric characters. That's that CSRF token. So we're attaching the CSRF token to this post request. So CSRF middleware token, that's what's on that request. And it also has this choice right here. So we've got this choice that we're also adding to it. And that is coming from this name right here. And that's the value, I believe, is what's being input into here. So let's go back and see if we can somehow grab the choice from that. So Monty Python was the first one we created in our database. So I click vote. I should get 1. So there we go. There's that choice of 1. So we can grab, if we're able to grab the ID of the choice we want to increment from the post right here, we can do a try except. So we're going to say try selected choice equals question dot choices dot get, where the primary key equals this choice ID for this from that post request. If for whatever reason it fails, we can return render render, and we can render kind of whatever we want. We can render the request. We can do polls detail.html, and typically we'd want to render some error if an error happened. So we can say like render the question. Let's say like an error. There was an error. So we've got the selected choice. Now, so that worked. And at the very end, once we grab that selected choice, grabbed it. Now we're going down to this else statement. We're saying selected choice dot vote plus equals 1. Now we can save the selected choice. Save. And now we can actually redirect, because right now we're going to vote. If we get a successful vote, we go to this route, and then we want to redirect to the detail page. We can actually just say like render something like that. Let's just see if this works. So if we refresh this, go to Big Daddy, vote. Uh-oh. Request render. Let's see if this worked. I'm gonna actually, instead of return, I'm gonna do an HTTP response redirect. See if this works. And all right, polls, not a registered namespace. Ah, crap. All right, let's see if I can get this to work. So I'm going to go to /results, see if that works. There we go. All right. Let's go to polls. So when I click what's the funniest movie, it takes me to this detailed page. When I click on, so it's actually like look at, inspect the HTML elements. So each dodgeball, it's got 4 choice 2, 4 choice 3, 4 choice 4 with an ID of choice 4, value 1, 2, 3, 4. So when I click on like Spaceballs and click vote, what it's doing is going to this /vote. And then I go to the view method, vote, which grabs that question ID. I grab that question ID from the database. I grab the choice, the individual choice that I actually clicked, on, and I extract the choice by its ID by grabbing the choice ID from that post request. And that grabs it using the name choice because it adds this name as a value as a key on that post request. So I'm able to extract the choice ID. So I've got that choice ID. If for whatever reason I got an error, it would just render the detail page again, but it'll add this error key on the detail page. So in my detail page, I can say like, if error and if I can say like each error. So if there's an error on that key, then I can say display that value there. But if it does find a selected choice, it jumps down here to this else statement, it increments each vote by 1. So the current vote, and it reassigns that value. And then I save the selected choice. Then I use this HTTP response redirect that comes from the Django HTTP. And then we use this reverse, which essentially just reverses back to the results page where I also pass in the question ID. That way I can vote on all these different questions. A couple more things, or what questions do you have about that? I know we just covered a lot.
Can you go back to the template that generates our question ID? I believe it's on the index.
This part?
Yeah.
Yep. But before we, and this is before we actually call it quits, I want to show you why we use this in our URLs. This name equals index, name equals detail, name equals vote, whatever. So right here, we're hard coding this URL, polls / whatever. Maybe at some point in the future, down the line, engineers change and like, hey, we want to update our routes. We don't want to go to polls / whatever. We want to go to some other route. So if we did it this way, we'd have to go in all our templates and change this route to something else / question ID. But we want to make this route dynamic. So what we can do is leverage this name. And how we do that is utilizing this named route, because we named this route index. So in place of hard coding this, we can say we want to go to the URL. What was it? The detail. So again, we want to go to this link, this route, when we click on that link. We want to go to that detail, and we also want to pass in the question ID. I think I need, so there we go. So this is what is called a named route URL. So we're going to look for a URL in our URL patterns called with a name called detail, and we're going to pass in a question ID. And we can also just say question underscore ID equals question ID. So when I do that, it's going to say, hey, in our URLs, look for a named route called detail. So it comes into here. Hey, there's a named route called detail. Pass in this question.id into the route, into the URL, wherever the question underscore ID exists. So it's going to pass this ID into this question ID. So if I come back here, refresh polls, click that, everything still works. I can still vote. So it looks like I go to the vote. So we can also do that with the detail page. So here, again, this is, I'm hard coding this. So what I want to do is go to a URL named vote and pass in the question ID into a named route called vote. So if I come back here and refresh and click Big Daddy, everything still works. There we go. And that prevents us from hard coding any actual URLs. All right. What questions do you have? No?